extended to Tuesday, which was originally Sunday. You guys had some homework for chapter 4 was still due Sunday. And I was just asked about chapter 3. I can't remember for sure if it starts with chapter 3 or not, but I had some of the early homeworks. You were able to go in anytime throughout the semester just because people have things, signing up for things, whatever. So, but I have hard deadlines on the new one. So if you miss a deadline, I do allow one free pass. So you can come and see me if you miss a deadline. Otherwise, you'll lose credit for that homework if you start missing the due dates. So pay attention to those as best you can. Okay, any questions? So you've got an opportunity to maybe talk to John or as you prepare for the test Tuesday. This is probably, if you make it through this stuff, if this math stuff is kind of freaking you out and the elasticity and oh my gosh, are we going to be doing formulas like this all semester? The answer is no. This is pretty much the most strenuous calculations that we're going to do. So we kind of get them over with early. We will continue to do graphs the whole semester, and there certainly will be some things dealing with numbers and whatnot, but as far as really going through a formula like we do with elasticity, this will be some of the more challenging stuff. Questions there? All right. Today, unless anybody's got final questions on chapter 4 material, I think I said all I was planning to say.
Actually, I do.
Okay.
At the end of chapter 4, there's momentary, short run, and long run elasticity. And that was not something that we covered in class. It is on the test.
Yep. We covered it a little bit when we talked about time.
Okay.
So one of the things that determines the elasticity of supply and demand is time.
Time adjustment.
And the idea is if we don't allow anything but almost instantaneous, like what's the supply of bananas at Walmart right now? Go take inventory at Walmart, and they're only going to have so many bananas, 160 bananas, right? So the supply of bananas at Walmart right now looks like that. The supply curve is perfectly, what? When it's vertical like that? Perfectly inelastic, right? So it starts to look like an I for inelastic. So that would be the momentary supply curve if we'd only allow that. Now, if we think about how is Walmart going to respond to changes in demand over the period of a week, then that supply curve starts to flatten out a little bit. Like if they know there's a crazy demand for bananas because some new information comes out that bananas help save lives or something like that, then they might be able to get more bananas on the shelves and increase their stock of bananas when bananas go from 54 cents a pound to 78 cents a pound. They're like, oh, wow, yeah, well, let's do it, man. The demand is increased. I have an opportunity to do that adjustment. And then the longer we allow time to transpire, if we look at the supply over the course of a year, it might be real elastic. We can really respond. So the elasticity changes with the amount of time. Okay?
There was really some funky question about wages and elasticity of supply, but it didn't matter. It seemed to matter how I read this. I did not get what they were wanting in that question.
Okay. And with wages, that puts us into the resource market, so that's a little funny to begin with anyway, because then if we're looking at labor, the quantity of labor hours supplied at various wages, the supply curve is actually the households, right? So this is people, like you and I, that are supplying themselves to the market. So the supply curve is households. The demand for labor is businesses wanting to buy labor so that they can make stuff. Minimum wage, was it happen to be related to that possibly?
No, I thought it was actually had to do with short-run supply, and so I wondered if it had something to do with, when some of the technology is employed to increase, so that works. Only some of the possible adjustments to production can be made in terms of short-run supply, so wages would be one of those?
Yeah, that sounds like it's in the whole kind of supply of a good, that wages would be one of those things. Because if this is the labor market, but these people are making bananas, then the supply of bananas comes from a company that makes bananas. That company has to buy people hours to make the bananas. So it sounds like that question is kind of going back and forth. But let me just comment one more thing on the wage. Sometimes you might have a question like, Walmart can hire as many people as they want at $8 an hour. You know, what does that supply curve look like? Well, if they can hire as many people as they want at $8 an hour, then the supply of labor is perfectly elastic at 8. So they want to have, remember this, the demand curve is Walmart now. If they want to hire, if their demand for labor is 100 people, or if their demand for labor is 150 people, they can hire as many people as they want at the $8 wage. So then the supply is perfectly elastic. So sometimes wage problems are worded like that. All right, so that's at least a good, good quick overview here of some of the things we deal with elasticities. And elasticities aren't going to go away going into this next material, which is government intervention. So, to this point, we're slowly but surely trying to capture the idea of the market of voluntary exchanges going on. And the most notable absent agent in this is the government. We've got businesses, we've got households where you're like, wait a second, Russ, if you listen to the radio or turn on the news, the government's in the news every single day. Right? Without question, there's some sort of new thing changing. So we need to bring the government into the picture. So we have remember the kind of looking at the forest again. The output market is the market for final goods and services. The resource market is all of the factors of production, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. They're all owned by human beings in some way, shape, or form. Even if it's a corporation, the corporation is owned by human beings. So human beings own all of the resources. They supply the resources to businesses, and businesses make stuff and supply that back to the households. That's our market system. So on figure 2.6, I called it enter government. Dun, dun, dun. Okay? No, hopefully it's a good da-da-da-da-da, you know, some sort of nice thing, entry. But enter the government into the picture. How does the government fit into this? So the government has multiple purposes, and in order to be sustainable with it spending money on stuff, it needs to collect money. How does it collect money?
Taxes.
Taxes. What kind of taxes?
Income taxes.
Income taxes. What
Housing
else?
taxes.
Sales tax, property tax, inheritance tax,
We could just go on.
excise tax, tax. Yeah, we could go through a whole list of capital gains tax, and I mean, you can take other courses, and you probably will, maybe even in some introductory accounting classes or otherwise, where you can start to really detail out all the taxes. So from an economist standpoint, from our picture of the marketplace, taxes, sorry, I just saw you back here kind of checking out what's all going on. Yeah, I got to lose some points for that. That's all got to be shut down. What's your name? Marshawn? All right. So remember, you got to shut down all your equipment, disengage yourself from the rest of the world so that we can try to squeeze a little bit of time into econ here. So let me get Marshawn taken care of. All right. So, in the big scheme of things, there's only two places for the government to collect those funds, right? So you've got households that are going to stores and buying stuff. So at the cash register, that's where the sales tax comes in. So we call that a consumption tax. In general, it's a consumption tax. It's going on at the exchange of final goods and services. Down in the resource market, we have the income tax, right? Income is something you generate off the resources that you own. The most common one we think about is our labor with your paycheck. So if you go put 10 hours in of a shift and you're making $10 an hour, do you get $100 on your paycheck when you collect it? No, right? The government collected some money out of that. So on the bottom, if you guys have these available, I encourage you to open up and take notes. You'll see that I've got the little green arrow here. That's the little green arrow of money kind of being siphoned off that stream heading towards the White House. And up top, the same thing is going on with expenditures. All the money that we spend, that the household spends, does not end up with the business. It ultimately gets kind of siphoned off here towards the White House. Those are the only sources of tax revenue for the government. All the laundry list of things, when we talk capital gains, and we talk estate tax, and we talk blah, 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 all of those really fall into those two generic categories. It's either a consumption tax or an income tax. Okay, so then what does the government do with that money? So I've got three types of G, G1, G2, and G3 if you look at that. So first of all, look at G1. G1 is the government going to buy stuff like weapons of mass destruction, right? So if we're going to load up for Syria, we're going to go buy some weapons. Who are we going to buy it from? Typically, an American firm. So we go to an American business, we say, hey man, I need 100,000 AR-15s. How much is that going to run me? Oh, no problem. They just ring it up. So the government just goes to the store, like 8 households go to the store and buy stuff. They also buy toilet paper for the White House at Walmart maybe, right? So they're going to the store and making those purchases. So those are one type of purchases that the government's making, the G1. G2 is the government buying labor as well as other resources. So some of the resources that households own over here end up getting redirected. You see the red line going up. Some of those resources go to the White House. Somebody is cleaning the toilets at the White House, right? That's a hired position. That person gets paid a paycheck. That's the G2. So G2 is spending on resources that the government is using. And of course, notice here that the G2 comes back into the stream. The person who works for the White House comes back, and then they get a little bit sucked out of their paycheck before it gets to their hands over here too, right? So that kind of a little circular thing going on all by itself. And then my last generic category is G3. I have that going straight from the government over to the households, and those are transfer payments. So Social Security is a transfer payment. It's not a retirement fund in the traditional way that you might be thinking, that you set aside part of your paycheck and you put it in a mutual fund or some stock market thing and you get money at the end. You're saving. The Social Security from day one has always been a tax the young, give it to the old. Take it from the young. It's a revolving door, and it's always been that way. We're going to take money from the youth and give it to the old. Young to old. Young to old. There's no retirement fund. It's not going into anything productive. It's a tax and transfer program. Take the money from the young, give it to the old. That's the way it's always been. And then we're having a little bit of a problem. Have you guys heard about the Social Security time bomb ticking? So, I mean, here's the short of it. We went into war, World War II. Our troops came back and they wanted to make babies. So they made a whole bunch of babies. And what do we call that? The baby boom. So now we've got all these boomers that are getting to be the old people. And the system, like I said, has always been take from the young, give to the old. And that worked great when the baby boomers were young and working. We had quite a bit of money to transfer back to the old at the time. But now that the boomers are the old people, and there's this big old bubble of boomers sitting there wanting to get their fair share, that was what the deal they bought into, guess whose paychecks that's coming from? You got it. You guys. You guys are the ones funding that. And the problem is there's less and less of you out there to transfer it back to the old. And so that's the Social Security time bomb, is that we really don't have that fully funded. It's not sustainable the way it is, and it's looking to blow up on us here in 2020 or 2030. But you know how good Congress is at figuring out those sorts of details. So they've been pretty good recently at coming to consensus and figuring out how to balance things out and work it out. Yeah, not exactly. They just tend to kick the can down the road and say, oh, we'll do it next year. Let's just raise the debt limit. Let's go next year. And so that's what a lot of this borrowing today with building up debts and having deficits is going on, because we have essentially some unfunded initiatives that were promises made before that now have to be funded. And we just don't have the tax dollars, especially when we're coming out of a recessionary time. So that was the transfer part. That was just one example. Take from the rich, give to the poor, kind of the Robin Hood theory, right? So we have a progressive tax system where the rich pay proportionately more tax than the poor do. So take from the rich, give to the poor. Take from the employed, give to the unemployed. The unemployment checks that maybe some of you know some people have collected when they lost their jobs during the recession. Again, that's just a tax and transfer program. We're going to take some money from the people who are employed, give it to the unemployed. So lots of that, and unfortunately we're at a point that's kind of a big deal where 60% of your federal tax dollar is going towards transfers now. Not towards weapons of mass destruction, not towards national defense, not towards schools and education, roads and bridges and all of that stuff that we kind of have the perception of where our money's going. But every $100 of tax that you pay to the federal government, 60 of it is going to various transfers. So that's kind of our little snippet of macro snapshot of that, and it's an important issue. All right, so questions or comments there? Now that's just on the tax side and spending side. So what we're going to do in Chapter 5 that we're in is look at our basic model of the free market and interject the government. How does the government play out? So this is really from just kind of a stand back and let's just kind of see where it's going. Not so much making a normative judgment on what the government should do or shouldn't do. We're just going to look at the policies and see what they are doing from our market standpoint. So hopefully you guys are starting to become comfortable with home base. This is our free market situation, which is very unrealistic, by the way. So we're doing a little bit of theory work. We're saying theoretically, suppose that there's no taxes, there's no subsidies, there's there's nothing. It's just the interaction of businesses and households in determining an equilibrium price and quantity. So we call it P1 and Q1. That's our initial equilibrium. So from each one that we go through, so just kind of make a note to yourself, each type, and this is kind of for starters, but each type of government intervention that we're going to explore, each type of government intervention will be compared to the free market. And so free just means kind of free from government intervention. Free from government is the lingo that we're using. As we start to get a little more detailed, we can maybe start with a situation where the government is already in the market and we want to make some sort of change. That reminds me to specifically have you bring next time these sheets. So if you didn't bring your book, and I see a lot of you with them out, which is great, you can actually bring just this sheet. We're going to use it next time and maybe the following time. I'm not sure. We'll see how our timing goes. But there's a worksheet that we're going to go through for government intervention stuff. And that is I guess it's figure 2.9, welfare analysis, where we're going to look at the impact of various types of government policy. All right, so government intervention number 1. We're going to look at a price ceiling. So, let's see, types of government intervention. Number 1, a price ceiling. A price ceiling is a legal maximum price. A legal maximum price. In other words, by law, a law was passed to say prices cannot go above this amount, the ceiling amount. So prices cannot go above the ceiling price. Another little note. If prices are below the ceiling price, that's fine. No big deal, right? So it's an ineffective price ceiling if current prices are below the ceiling. So one extra little bullet note here before we get looking at the graph is that a price ceiling is ineffective. In other words, it just doesn't have any real effects. A price ceiling is ineffective if market prices are below it. If the market price is below it. These end up being little nuances that a multiple choice problem would have in it. So I kind of try to give you these bullet points so you just got them right in your notes and you can look back. All right, so you guys can draw a new home base if you want in your notes. I'm just going to use this one since it's here. But if you wanted to continue your notes down so that you've got what home base looks like. So starting from our home base, I'm going to implement a price ceiling. So let's put a little numbers on here. Let's say that currently apartments are, two-bedroom apartment is $700. Probably a little steep for Ottawa, but not too bad. So $700 is the current market price. And the city council has got together and they're like, you know what, that's just way too high. I don't think a two-bedroom, you know, we got to have people be able to have places and encourage people to live here. So I don't think that prices should be above $500. So the government sets a law and says that rents cannot go above $500. That's the law. In general, this is called a price control, by the way. Price control. What is going to be the effect of that?
Supply goes down.
Supply goes down. So supply going down, supply is going to shift to the left?
Yeah.
Everybody agree with that? It's going to shift?
Not sure.
I think
Shelby?
it's going to shift to the right.
Going to shift to the right?
No, it's just moved down a little bit.
Move down along it?
Yeah.
Okay, so whenever we get into the shift business, we got to go back to our mental list here. See how good your mental list is. Give me a supply shifter.
Population.
Population, that's a demand shifter, but you could tweak that a little bit to come up with the supply shifter version of it. So the supply, talking about companies, it was the number of suppliers, the number of firms. Remember, if there was more pizza places in town, the supply of pizza would go up. That's one thing. Okay, I'll let you cheat now. Flip back in your notes. Let's get them listed here. Number of firms.
Production factors.
Production factors like what?
Wages.
Wages, which is the price of resources. So that's the other shifter, is the price of resources.
Price
Number of firms, price of resources,
Price of related output.
price of related outputs, if it's wheat and corn or honey and beeswax.
Expectation.
Expectations,
Technology.
technology,
And weather.
and the weather. Those were our shifters. So we all have those memorized. We will, right? So that's the list I really encourage you to memorize. And the reason I do is that we're going to do that all semester long. We're going to be shifting these curves around, and that's going to pay some big-time dividends for you if you've got that list memorized, as well as the demand shifters. All right, so price of apartments was not on the supply shifter list. So somebody said that correctly, or a couple of you did, that we're just going to have a movement along the supply. Probably getting the impact that Sheldon was alluding to is that, you know, if price goes down, people aren't going to supply as many apartments, right? And that's what your gut feeling was telling you. But what's happening is that there's a decrease in the quantity supplied, a movement along the stationary supply curve. Okay, what else can you analyze? That's good step one. But we ain't done yet. What else can you tell me about this story? Maybe we should put in a little more meat here. Let's just say that there was 100 apartments, and now there's 80 being supplied. So if prices were below the equilibrium price that the market would naturally go to, what did it create? A shortage. So we got a shortage of 20 apartments? Yeah? Jasmine? I saw you do this. I kind of like this. Your hand signals look good, so I thought maybe you're...
Well, I was just thinking because on a shortage, it's usually like between 2 points on the bottom.
Okay, good. What 2 points then? So what are you thinking here? Is it just 20? I mean, these are 2 points, so is it just 20 units that were short? No. How do we figure out what the true shortage is? There is a shortage. That part you are correct on.
Is it the points where it like?
What's that?
You have to find that point on the right of the shortage, the right side, right?
Okay, so where's it going? What do you want me to do? How do I find it?
Where the ceiling intersects the demand curve.
Where the ceiling intersects the demand curve. Why? Because that's showing what?
Demand.
The quantity demanded at that price, right? So at $500, do people want lots of apartments or a little apartment? Lots of apartments. They're cheaper, right? So the law of demand says that as the price goes down, people want to buy more. The problem is there's not going to be any more to go around. In fact, there's probably going to be less. Now, since Becky brought up the momentary supply and stuff like that, probably dependent upon the time frame. Because with apartments, can we change the supply of apartments tomorrow if the law was enacted today? No, it would probably be a momentary supply curve. It would be perfectly inelastic. But if we look at the supply of apartments over the course of a full year or something, less new apartments would go up, or some people would maybe turn them into a business operation instead of putting them out to rent, right? So we could imagine that the quantity supplied would fall. So at $500, we go over to the demand curve because it possesses information about the quantities demanded, and we'd read off this number. If this is a straight line, then this would be 120. And so the actual shortage is 40 apartments at the price of 500. A shortage of 40 apartments. Now, we had a story that we told about a shortage. In the face of a shortage from chapter 3, what happens to price? It goes up. Is that going to happen here? No, it's not allowed. So, with the imposition of a ceiling price, there's going to be a persistent shortage. That shortage isn't going to go away. So it doesn't disappear by the invisible hand that Adam Smith talked about. In other words, there's not going to be people bidding up the prices. The landlords can't raise the prices. That's the law. And so this is the prediction that we make on a price ceiling, that there'd be a shortage of goods and that would persist. So if we want, we could put on here the outcome would be a persistent shortage. It would not go away. Now, what else might you predict might happen if... Now you got to be a little... I want you guys to get creative now. I want you to really immerse yourself in a situation where there's... Some people, by the way, are happy, right? There's 80 people that are getting the 2-bedroom apartment at $500. Then there's some other people that are going without. So it's a mixed bag on the effects of the shortage. Some people are happy, they got their apartment cheap. Some people are going without. What might happen over time if we do allow, think about a year's worth of time or 2 years worth of time? New York City has had long-standing price ceilings in the apartment market. So what do you imagine might tend to happen over time in response to this price ceiling?
Struggling to find a place to stay.
Okay, struggling to find a place to stay. So maybe some homelessness or multiple people in a 1-bedroom. Like there's no 1-bedroom apartments, so the 1-bedrooms are fine. Other thoughts? Kind of push yourself here. Think creatively. If you're a landlord and there's no price controls on a 1-bedroom apartment, but there are on a 2-bedroom apartment, what might you tend to do? What does your new apartment complex look like when you build it? What might you tend to do?
Make more rooms on the one you have more freedom.
All right, some more rooms. So that walk-in closet used to be 6 foot by 4 foot. Now how big is that walk-in closet? 10 foot by 12 foot, right? That living room's a little bit bigger so that a partition could be put up, right? So we start to get kind of, think a little creatively on how we address the market need to help these people find a place. And these people, by the way, are willing to pay more than $500, right? So you could, in theory, create a situation where the 1-bedrooms now go up in price because we're funneling people into the 1-bedroom market by creative landlords and creative consumers, by the way, on wanting to say, oh, I just want a big 1-bedroom and we could easily hang a blanket up in the living room and I'll sleep here and that'll be my room and this will be your room, right? I mean, there's just ways that we start to be creative on working around whatever that is put in front of us. So that's how the system could be stepped. That might be perfectly legal to do, but it might also lead to some illegal stuff. Is common when we have situations like this. So how could we do some illegal stuff? If you're one of these people out here, or a landlord with a wink wink, what might you do illegally to try to get through the system and get your apartments rented up with consumers that are willing to pay more than what the government has told us that they need to sell at? Bribes, right? Oh, well, we have a little application fee of $1,000. I got a long waiting list, but you get bumped up the list a little bit if, wink wink, we have a little payment on the side and it comes right underneath the table, right? So if we have a $200 differential, we've got a consumer that wants to get in there, 200 times 12 for a 1-year lease, maybe we could talk $2,400 payment underneath the table somehow, right? all of a sudden we start to get creative on how we collect money. So those are the types of things that this can lead to, and certainly what's observed in the real world. So we have a persistent shortage. We potentially have incentive for illegal market, black market. So illegal markets to form. We've got existing conditions probably are starting to get run down, right? Well, this apartment sure could use some new paint. The landlord's like, I can't afford new paint. I mean, if we were getting market rates, I could afford new paint. But so we might start to see existing quality diminish. So from our apartment example, lack of maintenance. These are all predictions that we can start to use economics and figure out that that's going to probably happen. What seems like a good policy, who's this intended to help, by the way? I like to kind of think about when we look at policies, are we intending to help the consumers or producers?
Consumers.
Consumers. So the intentions of the policy are good. Oh, let's help the consumers. Well, helping them this way leads to these results that we can predict with economics. There's going to be a shortage. Long term, we might start to see some problems going on. Those are things that economists can start to predict from policies using our economic models. Okay, questions, last comments, questions on that? Let's see, let's add that little bullet in here. I wouldn't mind sneaking that one in too. The policy was intended, you can put it wherever you want on your paper, but intended to help consumers. And like we said, it does help some consumers, but it doesn't help all consumers because there's people that are going without. All right. Next on our list, we're going to flip it around and look at a price control called a price floor. So instead of setting a maximum price, the government's going to set a minimum price. And this type of policy is generally there to, so number 2 here is a price floor. And this is a legal minimum price. Price cannot go below the floor price. Price cannot go below the floor price. You may have figured out that we're trying to help the producers now. Intended to help producers. I think farming is probably the best example. We can't let corn prices fall that low. The family farm is going to go under if prices are that cheap. So let's set a price floor that's higher. Okay, so draw a home base, and maybe we'll look at the corn market. Price of corn, quantity of corn, just do some generic supply and demand curves. We have the market clearing prices at, let's just say, $3 a bushel. And let's just say there's 1,000 bushels of corn, or maybe it's 1,000,000 bushels, whatever. Put a number down there just to motivate things. So, in an effort to help protect farmers, we say that prices can't go below $5.50. So somebody did a study and said that would be the amount that would keep the family farm alive. So let's set a price floor at $5.50. So again, to be effective, the floor price needs to be set above the equilibrium price. Because notice if demand increases to here, let's put the golf club up here and we're trading up at $6.50, then the floor price doesn't matter, right? The market all by itself is going to be higher than the floor, so the floor doesn't matter. It's an ineffective policy at that point. So to be effective, the floor price needs to be set above equilibrium. To be effective, floor needs to be greater than the market price. Okay, what did chapter 3 teach us is going to go on in this situation? Surplus. Okay, so at a price of $5.50, consumers are like, I'm not going to buy that much corn like I used to. Corn's good, but I've got other choices in life, right? I'm going to substitute into some broccoli or something, I don't know. So we go down in terms of the quantity demanded. The quantity demanded falls to 600 bushels. Farmers are excited about this, and they respond naturally by increasing the quantity that they supply. And so the quantity supplied is out here at 1,400 bushels. But there's more coming to the market than what people are buying, so we've got a surplus. A surplus of corn to the tune of 800 bushels using the numbers that I just made up on the fly. Okay. Questions on that one? So did all the farmers get helped? No. The ones left holding the corn are out of that money. So they won't get any help from the policy. Okay, so how do we analyze the impacts of these policies? I am kind of weaving in and out of chapter 5 and 6 together. And so I'm going to start on the chapter 5 stuff right now, which deals with consumers' welfare. So, welfare analysis. So this is how we think about welfare. We're going to look first of all at consumer surplus, CS. How many of you have gone to the store and felt like you got a deal? Raise your hand. Okay, good. Wanted to see lots of hands. Just some activity going on. Hopefully we've all had a deal. What made it a deal? Why do you call it a deal? I want you to really think about the purchase that you had. What made it a deal? Just articulate that for me. Somebody tell me how you got a deal. Yes, Eric?
I feel like you have
Good quality product for a low price.
Okay, good quality product for a low price. Can you add on to that a little bit more? What made it a deal? I'm with you. You did okay, but I want to tack on even a little bit more. Reagan.
You paid less than what you expected to.
You paid less than what you expected to,
Or
right?
willing to.
For that, or willing to, for that high quality product, as you were saying, right? So it was cheaper than what you were willing to pay. So that's what consumer surplus is. Consumer surplus is the difference between what a consumer is willing to pay, and let's put in parentheses, that's the height of demand curve. Our demand curve tells us the willingness to pay. So we've got that information. So consumer surplus is the difference between what a consumer is willing to pay and what he or she actually pays. And what they actually pay is the market price. The difference between what a consumer is willing to pay and what she actually pays for each unit consumed / purchased. The ones that you actually got, which is important when we start to come back to this situation of price floors and price ceilings. So I want you to underline for each unit. All right, so draw just the demand curve, not the supply curve. Just draw some sort of ordinary demand curve. What I meant by the height is that if we think about each unit, the first, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, that shows our willingness to pay for each unit. We also called this the marginal benefit curve in chapter 2, I think, 2 and 3. So the demand curve reflected the benefits that we were going to get, our expected benefit for the good, for the first unit, the second unit, the third unit, the fourth unit, the fifth unit, the sixth unit. The interaction of supply and demand, now you can go ahead and draw that in. The interaction of supply and demand determines the market price. The equilibrium price. And so for our little hypothetical good here, let's just say it was $5. What we know from our demand theory is that for the first unit, there was a very willing buyer. Somebody really, really, really liked this good. They were willing to pay $9. They only actually paid $5. They walked out of the store and said, I got a deal. The second unit, somebody was willing to pay $8. They also only paid $5. So this vertical height here of $3, this vertical height of $4, and the vertical height of every other unit, if this was measured in thousands, we'd be starting to fill up this little triangular region all the way up here. That area represents consumer surplus. The difference between what we're willing to pay and what we actually pay for each unit consumed. So that whole area represents the market consumer surplus. So this little region represents the consumer surplus for the market. All the people who got deals. All right, we will pick up there on Wednesday.